Hi, I'm Mike from Eve's Coffee Roasters, and this is episode 2 of a video series on how to brew espresso. This video is going to cover the topic of how to adjust the grind. As per usual, I'm going to break down the complexity into many different steps. So this video we have 5 different steps on how to adjust the grind for a good tasting espresso. Getting the grind right is probably the most important component in getting a good extraction in a good tasting espresso. It is probably also one of the most difficult tasks of a barista because it is a trial and error method rather than giving you some settings and away you go. So this takes a lot of trial and error and a lot of time and practice. For this exercise, we're going to also need some kitchen weighing scales, or if we don't have access to them, some measuring jugs will fine. If we are using kitchen weighing scales, they must be quite small and thin and have the ability to fit a cup on top of the weighing scales to be able to measure the espresso liquid coming out of the machine. So if we don't have them, a measuring jug will do. Ideally one that goes up to 60 mils, or in this case we're using a double shot, so we have 2 small measuring jugs. There are many different conditions that can affect grind size, and this can depend on a daily or even hourly basis. Factors such as the age of the beans, the type of the beans, or even on-the-spot factors such as the ambient temperature and humidity have a big influence on the grind size. It is also important to note that each machine has a different grind size and setting. Even this Breville Barista Expresso grind setting number 2 may be different than another machine on the exact same setting. So let's get stuck into these 5 steps. As I explained before, this is done by a trial and error method basis, so I can't give you certain settings and away you go. So step number 1 is to start by pulling an espresso shot and timing the extraction from start to finish. Because this tutorial is aimed for many different machines, I'm going to be doing this extraction manually, meaning that I'm going to press this button to start the extraction, and I'm also going to press the button to stop the extraction rather than letting the machine stop the extraction itself. Now let's grab our weighing scales or our measuring jug. Now ideally you want to be following your coffee roaster specifications rather than the guidelines I give you here, but for the sake of simplicity and to give you an example, I'm going to show you some guidelines that you can potentially follow. If you're using measuring jugs, we're going to be aiming for 60 mils, and this is if you're using a double shot portafilter and basket like we are here. If you're using kitchen weighing scales, we're going to be aiming for 40 grams. Again, if you have your coffee roaster specifications, you can follow those rather than these guidelines, as those guidelines are going to be specific to the beans that you're using. Now let's get started by starting the extraction and also starting a timer. With the extraction that we just pulled here, I stopped the extraction when we yielded 40 grams and the timer read 24 seconds. So step number 2 is to compare our extraction with our desired extraction. Again, if you have your bean specifications, please refer to these, but I'm also going to give you some guidelines here. So again, we had an extraction time of 24 seconds achieving 40 grams. But in this scenario, we want to achieve 40 grams in 30 seconds. So during this step, we need to assess whether we need a shorter or a longer extraction. 24 seconds was our time and 30 seconds was our desired time. So in this scenario, we obviously need a longer extraction. Now that we've identified we need a longer extraction, this brings us to step number 3. Identify what way we need to adjust the grind. There are only 2 different grind adjustments, and this applies to all different grinders. And these are making the grind finer or making the grind coarser. A really good analogy that I like to teach here with the grinder is to pretend that the hopper is full of rocks. If we pour water over into this hopper, the water is going to flow through these rocks and drip at the bottom really fast. But if we grind these rocks into a consistency of sand-like, it breaks down the rocks into similar consistencies to sand. And now that if we pour the water on top, the water is going to take a lot longer to travel through the passages of the sand, and it's going to drip a lot slower. This exact same analogy can be applied to coffee, meaning that a coarser grind, which is the beans acting like rocks, will flow very fast. And if we grind these beans into a finer consistency, now I'll go a little bit finer, then the coffee is going to drip through and it's going to be a little bit slower. To repeat here again, we had a 24-second extraction and our desired extraction is 30 seconds. So we need to go finer with the beans. This is because we need to grind these beans into a finer consistency, so when we pour the water over it, it's going to take a longer time to travel through the coffee, thus getting our 24-second extraction closer to a 30-second extraction. Now our last step is to make the changes and adjust the grind. This is heavily dependent on the equipment that you have. Here we're using the Breville Barista Expresso, which has a built-in grinder. If your espresso machine has a separate grinder, you will need to do the adjustment on the grinder itself. So an important caution here when adjusting the grind is that you need to do a process called purge before you get on the new grind setting. Purging just allows you to remove any of the ground coffee on the old grind setting that is inside the machine or grinder before the new grind comes through. So this is again dependent on the machine that you have here. With this machine, it's usually equivalent to grinding enough coffee for 1 cup, which is about 18 grams in this basket that we're using here. Throwing that coffee away or accepting that that coffee is not going to be the correct extraction, and then the next coffee will be so. With some of the grinders like the very popular Mazza grinders, we often need to purge for enough for up to about 2 whole coffees or about 30 grams of ground coffee before you are on the new grind setting. Once you've made the adjustments, it's time to pull a shot and check it out. After you've pulled a shot, take note of the extraction time and check if it's now within parameter. If not, you can repeat these steps and make some more adjustments by going another step finer or coarser, because sometimes 1 notch or 1 dial may not be enough and you may need to tweak these settings a little bit more and keep on playing around with it. This is where it gets a little bit tricky because it's a trial and error process, and this whole process may take a few times. You may need to adjust the settings more than once to get your correct grind size. Every grinder and machine is a little bit different as well. 1 dial on this machine here may be equivalent to about 3 to 4 seconds of extraction time, but 1 dial on a different grinder or a different machine may be a lot more or a lot less. So it's a matter of getting used to your equipment and understanding how your equipment reacts. This concludes the basics in understanding grind size and how to adjust it. It is the main variable that you're wanting to change in order to get your espresso extraction on point. It is also the variable that the barista changes many times throughout the day, depending on factors such as temperature and humidity, and when adding a new bag of beans. The barista will identify the change in extraction by the timing rather than in variables such as the temperature and humidity. So when the extraction timing is not right, the barista will then make the changes and go finer or coarser in the grind to get their extraction on point. The next video, we're going to cover things like fine-tuning your espresso machine. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you there.